Hello, everyone. My name is Carolina Barrios. I'm part of the humanitarian disarmament team at the Colombian campaign to ban landmines. This is our first international podcast with our first international guest from Canada, Erin Hunt, and I hope that you like it. Hello, everyone. We are delighted to have with us Erin Hunt, which is the director of Mine Action Canada. This is our first international podcast in the Colombian campaign to ban landmines, and we would like to hear from Erin. A brief introduction from yourself.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. As you said, I'm the executive director of Mines Action Canada. I'm very honored to be joining you today from the traditional territory of the Lekwungen speaking peoples on the western coast of what is now Canada. And I'm very honored to be your first sort of international guest on the podcast. I've been working or volunteering in disarmament for most of my life now, and working for Mines Action Canada for about 15 years, 14 years. I'm looking forward to chatting with you and sharing some of my experiences.
Thank you. Well, first, I would like you to tell us, for someone who hasn't heard about what is humanitarian disarmament and especially what is advocacy, how would you describe your work?
Sure. I describe my work in different ways for different people. For like my 5 and 6 year old nephews, um, I describe it as making sure that when there's a war, the weapons don't hurt people that they aren't supposed to hurt. But a grown-up version of that is humanitarian disarmament is about looking at what weapons do to people and making policy suggestions and potentially new law suggestions based on that harm that the weapons are causing to people, communities, and the environment. And what makes it really interesting is we do this in partnership with affected communities, other NGOs, states that are what we call like-mindeds, and international organizations. So it's a very like collaborative process. And because we're looking at what the harm does to people, it's really easy for everyone to understand.
Yes, that's right. And what was your motivation to enter to humanitarian disarmament? Which were your first steps?
I started volunteering actually during university, doing public engagement and mostly talking to high school students about the Ottawa Treaty banning landmines. And what I realized through doing that was this was a solvable problem. Like anti-personnel landmines, this huge global problem, but we can actually fix it. And anyone who spent a large amount of time with me knows I like to win. So the idea of being able to work on a global problem where you can see the progress and you can see the wins and you can actually fix the problem is really appealing to me. Like I know with the Colombian campaign, like you guys are actually like taking the landmines out of the ground and whole areas of Colombia that were contaminated when I started working for MAC are clear now. And like that's such an awesome win. So that sort of keeps me motivated and why I want to work on this issue.
Yeah, definitely. Advocacy is very connected to also the communities, not only affected, but like donor countries. What you said, this is a very collaborative space. And what was it like to be a woman in these spaces? Did you ever felt any barrier, any challenges, any gender-related issue when you started working in humanitarian disarmament?
When I started, as I worked now, yeah, for sure. I know I've had it a little bit easier than many because I came from a victim assistance background. When I was working in the field, I was providing, victim assistance services to survivors, and that's a little bit more gendered as female because it's, service provision to people, it's getting them medical care, it's connecting them to psychosocial supports. Whereas, especially when you're talking about the technical side of things, anything with weapons is very coded male. And so for a long time, especially like the surveying clearance sectors, been really heavily male and really heavily ex-military male. So, I think militaries have their own culture, and sometimes feels a little bit like gender norms on steroids. So there's definitely this sort of impression that some of the work that I do is not normally where women work, right? I think the folks that work on clearance get this more than we do, but I was really lucky in that starting at a very young age in the international campaign to ban landmines, I had a lot of sort of mentors and women who had come before me that were able to be really successful in the field and in this sector without sort of conforming to that really militarized masculine understanding of what an expert in mine action looks like and acts like. So I'm thinking of people like Perna, who's the head of the campaign, Nepal campaign to ban landmines. Jody Williams, who I think many people know as the 1997 Nobel Peace Laureate, along with the ICBL. Jody has never conformed to anything in her life. Um, Mary Wareham at Human Rights Watch, some of the folks that CCCM works with, like Pia Devoto from Argentina. There's a lot of those women that came before me and still act as themselves all the time, still dress as themselves and haven't conformed. So that's been really helpful. And now that I'm sort of in a higher position, I try to do that for the women that are coming after me. But yeah, it's definitely sometimes still an old boys club.
Okay. And for example, with you being a leader, can you tell us a little bit more about the Mind Action Fellow program and how has this helped to other young women to do this advocacy training, to connect with other women internationally, and to start seeing the ways where you can contribute to humanitarian disarmament?
Yeah, so the Mind Action Fellows program is the newest iteration of our youth program, newest edition. Um, I actually went through Max Youth Program, and I guess I can say it was in 2007, which I know some of our new youth campaigners were barely born then. Um, so the Mind Action Fellows program, we sort of built it based on my experience as a youth campaigner and sort of what we were seeing in the sector. And it combines participating in diplomatic meetings with capacity building so that you know what you're doing when you're bringing your experience from your own country into the UN. But we also include like monthly learning and a big network of other fellows to learn from who are around the world. We have about 150 fellows now, starting from the original 35 from 2019. And we occasionally are able to offer small grants that give folks the ability to implement their own projects. And I think where this fits into sort of this discussion of women in humanitarian disarmament is we looked around the diplomatic space, we looked at who's in the room, we read the reports on talking about these statistics. And while the program started as all women, because we realized there was a bit of a gender imbalance in decision making when it comes to disarmament. So we started the program all young women, but we also know that you need young men to get to achieve gender equality. So we now include young men, but we reverse the proportions. So most diplomatic meetings are like 70% men. So the Mind Action Fellows program stays about 70% women, which is super interesting to see all of the young women who are working or studying or volunteering in the sector really embrace their roles as leaders. And it's also really interesting to watch the young men who, for many of them, it's their first time being in a heavily female dominated workplace and like a workspace. So, I mean, we do have to have conversations about what needs to be done, or like how to react if someone says something inappropriate to you, or you're made uncomfortable by one of the delegates. And for a lot of the young men, this is the first time they've ever heard that women have these conversations. So I think that's like absolutely fascinating to watch. But flipping the ratio and making the program sort of female dominated really helps change the narrative around who can be an expert in disarmament. Because everyone in our program, they know what they do in the field, they know how to implement these decisions that the diplomats are making, and being able to highlight that expertise and then see them sort of come into confidence in their own expertise is just so rewarding.
And from your expertise, can you tell us about one moment that you felt really privileged or that you felt that you were winning because gender was included into the international treaties, or a special moment in your career when you said this is not only a goal for me as a woman, but also for all women around the world?
Um, I mean, we've been very successful in the Ottawa Treaty and the Convention on Cluster Munitions and sort of starting to mainstream gender more. But probably the biggest win for my career was the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And this was negotiated in 2017, and we were part of sort of the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons negotiating team. And my focus was on the positive obligations part of the treaty, so like victim assistance and environmental remediation. One of the other things we were working on was getting really strong language around gender and women's participation in the treaty. And the way things ended up, the text that the states adopted was like the first nuclear weapons treaty to have really strong obligations on states on women's participation in the treaty. And it also included specific language on the participation of Indigenous peoples, because Indigenous peoples had experienced disproportionate impact from nuclear weapons use and testing. So being able to see that show up in the treaty after us talking about it for quite a few years was really rewarding, because it's in the text forever.
That's great. And well, you were talking about, nuclear weapons, cluster munitions, landmines, but humanitarian disarmament is like a huge world where many types of weapons are together. In which of these fields do you think that we still need to reinforce, or that is especially weak in gender issues nowadays?
Honestly, nuclear weapons. The way we talk about nuclear weapons is very gendered. I mean, the classic example is from a few years ago, where the American president, like when it was President Trump the first time, and he starts talking about how much bigger his nuclear button is than the the head of North Korea's nuclear button. And I mean, come on, boys. Like, no. So I think, the way we talk about weapons and how gendered that is probably one of the areas that needs the most work. And it's also sort of the hardest thing to help people understand, because like that example with like comparing sizes of buttons is, pretty obvious. But there's some that are just not quite so obvious, like this idea that rearming and using weapons for deterrence, especially nuclear weapons for deterrence, well, that's rational decision making. And disarmament is, that's just, wishful thinking. You're thinking with your emotions. That's soft. Like, that's not keeping people secure. Where, I mean, going against the status quo on nuclear weapons, like that's so much harder than just going along with the way things have been for the past 80 years. And this whole idea of, rationality versus emotion is, very gendered, and that, men are rational and you women are just, you're just too emotional. You don't understand the reason we need these weapons. You can't understand that. They don't necessarily say it like that, but that's sort of an underpinning line to the discussions. And with we're seeing in sort of especially North America and Europe this move towards more weapons and higher spending on national defense for security. But if you go and talk to people, what they're worried about is the like increasing price of groceries, or can they afford a home, and climate change and all these other softer types of security. And I think that's where humanitarian disarmament can come in handy, because it looks at what's actually harming the security of people, what's making people's lives harder, what's hurting the environment. And then, yeah, so I think, there's a lot of work to do in how we think about weapons. We're getting pretty, I'm not going to say good because we're nowhere near 50%, but we're doing okay on like getting women involved. But changing that mindset from that super masculinized and like militarized masculinity is going to take a lot more work.
Yes, I think something that you were talking about, and it's very important, is how do we think about security in a broader sense? I think like the wars that were happening in the centuries ago, they made us think that security is all about weaponry and heavy machines, but what it's really like, it's how people feel every day and what their real concerns are. But I would like you to ask, what can we do, women in disarmament nowadays, to keep pushing gender issues, to keep working towards, and what can we teach to everyone else from advocacy, from our work that highlights the gender issues that we are facing right now?
Ooh. Well, I think the number one thing to remember is that everybody has a say in these issues. Like when it comes to nuclear weapons, you don't have to have like a PhD in military strategy or strategic studies to know, what, blowing up an entire city and like leaving radiation all over the ground, that seems bad. Having autonomous weapons where the sensors and the data and the algorithms choose who gets fired upon and who gets shot, who lives and who dies, like that also seems bad. You don't really need to be an expert on AI to figure that one out. So I think one of the things we can do is remind people of their own power. And all these treaties in humanitarian disarmament that we've worked on have been because people have stepped up and said that this is unacceptable for me. And you can look and see a lot of like these movements have been led by women, which, is another good example and like role models for a lot of younger people that you can you can do these things. You don't have to be anyone special. At Minds Action Canada, one of our little like slogans is ordinary people, extraordinary impact. And I really believe that. But like on to get around some of the barriers that are set up for women, I think we can work together. There's no need to like compete with each other. There's no need to be um, anything but on each other's teams. And I see this when we work with civil society and the governments. With the women diplomats, will often want to, support civil society's space, and sometimes other women just need you to sort of be like, oh well, the point that she made was really good. Like I'm going to just repeat it again. Or, oh, I don't think we should be interrupting her when she talks. I want to hear what she has to say. And just sort of that reinforcing of our own right to be there. I mean, women are half the population. Why shouldn't we have half the say on disarmament issues?
Totally, we should be acknowledged and we should support each other. And when we collaborate together, we're definitely stronger. If you could change something about the humanitarian disarmament world and advocacy today, what would you change, especially considering that right now, geopolitically, we are having lots of tensions? And what can we women do to change what you want to change?
Well, I mean, is it a cheap answer to say I would change our budgets so we had lots more money to do the work? That would probably be my biggest change right now. When things get tight, people often forget that advocacy does cost money, and we're the ones that monitor the progress, and we make it sort of possible to do all these other things. At Minds Action Canada, we sort of look at ourselves as a bit of like building the structure for success. And I think advocacy really does that. So I'd love to see more support for advocacy organizations in the humanitarian disarmament sector. And I think in particular, when it comes to like women's participation in the sector, we should be looking a little bit more at, you know, recognizing expertise no matter how it looks. So, you know, you can show up in a floral dress and bright colors or your traditional national clothing into these diplomatic spaces, and you can still have things to say. You don't have to dress in a black suit like all of the Western men to be taken seriously. And I think that's something that we can embrace. I guess it would be more authenticity in our work. So be who you are, and share why you're passionate about the issue, because that's what makes people want to join with you, right? Facts and figures help, but it's the personal stories that make people want to be part of a movement. And right now, we can offer people the opportunity to make an impact and have a success story. So I think that's really important to share.
Why are you passionate about this job?
I think it comes back to the like, I like that we get to actually like have an impact, see our impact, see the change. And also, we work with awesome people. I mean, just look around your office at the folks from CCCM, awesome. Whether you're almost, I've been to like 4 or 5 continents in the past year and a half, and every single one of them, I see disarmament people, and they're always wonderful to work with and passionate about their work and doing great things in their community. And how can you not want to be part of that?
Thank you so much for that insight. And you also touched something that I think it's very important and we should appreciate, and it is what can we do to get more funding right now? I think sometimes this is something that doesn't currently depend especially on us. It's about government collaboration, it's about seeking projects, it's about, connecting with people. What do you think, or what strategies can we now use to get more funding, especially considering that governments are trying to cut funds, that financially the world is complicated right now? So what would you say, what can we do as a community to keep more attention and funds to humanitarian disarmament?
Yeah, I mean, if I had the perfect answer, we wouldn't be in this problem. And I wouldn't have spent like most of the past 3 days working on project proposals. But what we have that I think the world is lacking is success stories and good news stories, and giving people, donors, whether they're governments, whether they're individuals who give $4 a month or $4 a year, or whether they're individuals who give 40,000 a year, or whether they're corporations or foundations that want to give. I think offering people a way to do something when the world is so terrible, and do something that's going to have an impact and that's going to most likely be successful, I think is really important. And I think we need to tell our stories better. I mean, the Landmines Treaty has cleared over 30 countries of landmines. So there are literally millions of people who can go for a walk through a field without fear of death because of this treaty and our work. Like, what's better than that? Knowing that like 30 countries worth of kids can play without ever being scared of the ground.
Our storytelling
It's a
is
good thing to be part of.
deeply powerful. Yes, I agree. Well, thank you so much for your time. And our last question, I promise, is what lesson can you give to young women that are trying to do advocacy today?
Be yourself. I mean, the one thing that I always tell people when they're starting advocacy is this is about talking to people. And especially, so get comfortable talking to people, especially if you've like worked in a shop or a restaurant or done any sort of job where you have to deal with the general public. You are very qualified to do advocacy. I mean, if anyone's ever yelled at you about a shoe size or told you that the wait for their table or their food was too long, I mean, you can handle even the scariest diplomat. Um, so I think, practice talking to people, but have that confidence that you know what you're talking about. Like, do the research, keep up to date. But if you come from an affected community, you're an expert on these weapons. You know what they do. You just have to be yourself and tell them what it means for you to live in a community that has landmines or a country that has cluster munitions, or a city that's been bombed. Like, just be yourself and provide that sort of human story.
Well, this was Erin Hunt. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing these magnificent stories, lessons, and I hope that we see each other soon. Thank you so much for the work.
Thanks so much for having me, and good luck with the rest of the podcast. I'm looking forward to seeing your other guests.
Thank you so much. Have a nice day, and we'll send it to you ASAP.
Awesome. Okay, thanks.
Goodbye. Thank you so much. Well, this was it. Thank you so much for your time, for listening. Remember to follow us on social media. Remember to keep learning about advocacy, and it was a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you so much, and goodbye.